minute or two early just to see if everything's working. I hope you guys are all ready today to be thinking about your personal brand story and how we can pull that together. We've been using Webinars on Air. It works through Google+. And of course, they did some sort of upgrade last night. So when we got on this morning, nothing was working the way it should. And my mentor in all this, Lisa Leffler, has been on the other end of the line helping me pull this all together. So I want to make sure that I'm coming through loud and clear. Can you hear me okay? By the way, the chat, you can fire your chat up in the upper left-hand corner, and you can join the conversation right there. Also have a poll that I'd love to have you take this poll. Let me make sure that it is going live. It says it's live right now. Can you see the poll out there? Hey, Pam, thank you. Pam, can you see the poll? I've got a poll live, and it doesn't tell me on my end if you all can see it or not. Yep, okay, good. Hey, Jody. You can hear me great. Awesome. Glenn, welcome. Glad to have you here, Glenn. Love to have you all take the poll because we want to take a look and see where is everybody on this scale of, yes, I'm pretty confident storyteller, ooh, not so much. No poll, okay, thanks. Let me see about resetting this up. I'm a total novice at this. I'm going to reset this poll and see. Now can you see it? Just got it, right on. Okay, so I just had to resend it, but everyone get a chance to take a look at the poll there. And let's see where this group is. Paul, great to have you here. Tom McDermott, my good friend, that we've been working through his brand story. I mean, if you have not had a chance to see some of the work that Tom McDermott does with his Ignite program, you should check it out. Great stuff. In fact, was very instrumental for me back in about 2010 to help me get to where I am today with the Business of Story platform. Good stuff. Paul's coming to us out of Atlanta. We're right at the top of the hour. We're going to give just a minute or two for a few more people. Laura, great to have you here. You know, this wacky state of ours, state of Arizona, we do not observe daylight savings time, and it throws everybody off. It's so confusing. So we had people miss the last session because they were thinking we were Mountain Daylight Time, which is actually an hour ahead of us. Right now, we are Pacific Time. So I think of LA, that's the same time we are. When all of you fall back, let me go the other way, fall back in the fall, then we will become Mountain Time. So it's madness, but I know some people have been missing these sessions because of it. So glad to have you guys all here. Let's go over and take a quick look at the poll. I want to see how we do here. You good, good. We got some confident storytellers. Nice. 10-3, no, that's okay. You know, I was in Orange, California yesterday working with a very, very large nutritional company and was working with both their marketing and R&D folks, talking about a left brain, right brain workshop. It was great because I had scientists in there and then I had marketers, and there's about 20 of them in the room, plus the CEO of this very large company. He was such a believer, is such a believer in storytelling that he attended the entire session too, which is awesome because you don't normally get that high level buy-in. Anyway, when I asked them this question of that room, I bet you, I think 3 hands went up, said that I'm a confident storyteller, and 2 of those were in the R&D. The marketers were like, nah, maybe not really quite sure. So that's what this is all about. Business of Story is all about showing you these intentional tools that you can use for everything from your brand story, which we're going to be talking about today, your personal brand story, to get you differentiated in the market. And then how you can use this process for your clients if you're in, you know, anything from a leadership coaching role to a marketing role to a content marketer role. The thing about the story cycle process is it is all a fractal. It has these fractal properties. So what's going to work for you today on your story is the same thing that you can use on your client's story. It's the same thing you can use on writing your content for the web. It's the same thing you can use when you're creating your user experience for your website, for your client's website, whatever. That's the beautiful thing about this universal structure of story. You can use it across the board. So Really great. I see we got 12 yeses and 4 no's. All right, this is awesome because it's a little bit flipped on its ear from what I normally get. So anyway, why don't we start into today's show, and I am going to be jumping between my screen here and back and forth to my PowerPoint, and it's a little bit clumsy, or maybe I'm just a little bit clumsy. I haven't dialed this in quite yet, but we're going to get there. So let me jump into this. It's always something. Almost there. And voila, there we go. Welcome to today's session, Own Your Personal Brand Story to Grow Your Influence. Believe it or not, this is not something I initially intended to do with the business of story. It really all started as a brand strategy program working with our own clients. And it wasn't until I saw the impact this started having with the people in the room that there's this whole leadership side to it that I hadn't counted on. It's really powerful. And then I took that even one step deeper. And a lot of the work I've been doing throughout 2016 are with individuals just like you that are like, man, I need to kind of separate myself from the crowd. I need to level up what I do because we're all, I hate to say it, kind of a commodity. And we'll talk about that for a minute. So today's session is to show you how you can use the story cycle process. And we're going to go in and highlight 4 primary areas. So when you leave today's session, hopefully you will have a better idea of how to truly own your story and differentiate yourself in the marketplace. And as we go throughout this session, feel free to jump online and there we go. All Butterfingers here. Feel free to jump online with this hashtag and share with your world out there what you're learning throughout the session. What I'm going to do at the end of this is I'm going to give away one of our brand new story cycle workbooks. This is the 10-step process that you can use that'll take you through everything. And those of you that are on the webinar today, you may already have some of these. I know Tom has used it for his brand. What we have done is just kind of added some more content into this, brought our favorite character Edgar into the mix here. But this is an interactive ebook PDF that you can download and use following this session. Or if you happen to have this with you, you can follow along because we'll cover a lot of it in the session anyway. But if you're tweeting throughout the session, use this hashtag. I'll go back after the program and I will select a winner and send you your own free workbook, a $45 value. Actually, it's priceless. I like to think of it as priceless free advice. All right, let's jump right in. So why is it important to truly understand your brand story? Well, because you know something, we all come into this world as a commodity and we all go out of this world as a commodity. It's literally that dash of life, that what we do in between, the story that we live into and help people that we're remembered for. That's what differentiates us in this mass of society. And I like to think of this dash. I heard this, unfortunately, at a funeral ceremony I was at earlier this year, but I loved this poem, and I don't know if you've heard this before. And it's all about the dash of life, that, you know, things go so fast in the beginning, and then next thing you know, it's behind us, and what do we have left to show for it? Well, in our professional and personal and professional pursuits, we want to really be dialed in because sure, we want to make a good living and we want to be prosperous, but we want to do what we can to make others, people's lives better. And that I found when you really focus on that in your professional pursuits, everything else takes care of itself. So this is just a portion of this wonderful dash poem by Linda Ellis that says, "For it matters not how much we own, the cars, the house, the cash. What matters is how we live and love and how we spend our dash." Well, today I am hoping to help you get your story together so that you can make your dash even that much more amazing. And you think about it, our brands are just like, our personal brands are just like anything else. We are a commodity and we have to fight to be heard in this very loud attention economy. We literally live in a world of abundance. We have abundant choices. If you're a content marketer or a brand strategist, clients have an abundance of choices on who to go to. So we're commodities unless we really understand and own our brand story. If you are providing a service, be it leadership training, be it, again, marketing, consulting, content marketing, we are a commodity in that area. I can't tell you how many leadership coaches I now work with to help them find what they're really, truly all about through this process. So we are competing with lots of brands, big and small out there, to cut through. And then, of course, in addition to that, from Domo, all you got to do is look at the amount of competition, the abundance of communication that is going on in our lives that we have to communicate with, that we have to compete with, to cut through the attention economy. And the only way we can do that is not really through listicles and bullets and lousy PowerPoint presentations. By the way, this joke occurred to me yesterday. Why do most PowerPoints suck? Story vacuum. That's right. So we got to get in and truly own our story to learn what we are about. Now, in our last webinar, about 2 weeks ago, we talked about how this has changed so quickly. It used to be that brands owned the influence of mass media, but you know what? Technology, of course, we all know this, has completely leveled the playing field. And now the masses are the media. It used to be easy to go and push our messages out, but because the masses are the media, we have this din of communication. You've heard about the attention economy. People will only pay attention for so long. Some argue that even a goldfish has a longer attention span than human beings do. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I think just our BS monitor has ratcheted way up. We just simply don't have time for the BS that we have to wade through. And so when you own your story, it's about not spewing the BS. It's like really owning who you're about and cutting through the clutter and connecting with people on a very basal level. I always argue that ADHD has become a communicable disease. And you know what? We're all the viruses. We are the cause of this. And the only way that we can really get out of this is start entertaining and educating people. And you do that by knowing your story, having some fun with it, and really reaching out and connecting with them on a very human level. So I bring you our story cycle process. And if any of you have been following along, you know this was inspired by Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey. We took 17 steps of this amazing universal story structure, and we simply boiled it down to these 10 steps. And we've had a lot of fun with these 10 steps. I mean, I use it and I teach it at Arizona State University, where there is a master's program there, Executive Masters for Sustainability Leadership. So I get the pleasure of teaching this program to executives around the world to help them get their head around who they are first and foremost. And I see Kevin Gazzara has joined this. Kevin is our PhD leadership professor who I work alongside at in the Executive Masters program. And what's interesting about this, it's set up in 3 phases. Kevin showed me this process. Phase 1 is know thyself. And that's what we're doing today in using story to truly know thyself. And we teach these executives this. Why are they doing what they're doing? What do they stand for? And how does their personal brand stand out within their organization for, to create their influence? Number 2 is understand others. So we teach them how to use the same process to really start getting in the hearts and minds of their audiences and understand the journey their audiences are on, so that they can connect, our students can connect their stories with the audience stories on their terms, placing the audience at the center of the story, and then weaving those stories together and connecting with them like they never have before and move them to action. The final phase in all of this, again, using the same process, is to enact and sustain change. And that's what we're all about. So this is where the campaign development comes in, using the story cycle. Your communications, your PowerPoint, you use everything you've learned by applying it to yourself, by applying it to your audiences, and to then creating your actual execution. We will be talking about that in 2 weeks. So if you're interested in seeing how you apply the story cycle process to a client's brand and within a campaign, I'm going to run through and demonstrate how that is, because it's just this wonderful, fun, fractal nature of all of this. All right, let's go back to the PowerPoint already in progress here. So the story cycle, let's talk about how we can make this work for you. And I always ask, what is a brand? Now, it looks like we have a lot of branding folks on the program here today, so you probably already get this. But so often, when I'm working with people, they're thinking, well, a brand is my logo, or the brand is my website. Those are all just elements of the brand story, but I have boiled it down, at least for me. It's easier for me to get my head around this. A brand is the story an audience tells itself about how you perform physically and philosophically. What do you physically deliver, and emotionally, philosophically, what does it mean? Because story is all about creating meaning in our lives. What does it mean? So in the story cycle process, what we do here is I want you to think of it in a very linear fashion. Now, again, I started this presentation as reminding us that we all come into this world as a commodity and we all go out of this world as a commodity. It's what we do in between. It's the story we live into and prosper from that really, truly matters. So when you think about story, let's start on the left-hand side and take you from the left to the right. Now, the beginning of every story, and we're going to work on this in a minute for your story because this is the most crucial place to begin. Chapter number 1, what is the number 1 position you own in the marketplace? What do you do better than anybody else? Now, it's important as we walk through this to establish our story here, going from left to right, because what we want to do is step up out of this primordial muck of commoditization and start creating true meaning in our lives and true meaning around our brand. And this is where you start, by putting a stake in the ground, declaring your position, because we want to move from being a commodity to a specialty good or service. And you can only do that with a razor sharp positioning, which we'll work on in just a second. Why does this matter? Because we all get caught up in thinking what we make is at the center of our story, and that's not the case. It's what we make happen in customers' lives that really matter. So yesterday, for instance, again, working with this nutritionals company, and we were focusing on their one product line, and they were so steeped in what they make, and they were talking about how wonderful the product was. They were talking about the ingredients, the science behind it, and all that, and I had to keep reminding them, that's fine, but that's the cost of entry. That's the price of being good. It has to be a great product, but it's what you make happen in people's lives. Why do they take this product, and why does it matter to them? All right? And the third thing with this is think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When you start getting out of this idea of commoditization and really putting a fine-tooth point on your position, you start moving people up from this very basal need through safety, through love and belonging, self-esteem, and self-actualization. And I bring this all together in this next infographic, that when you use story and you go through the process and truly understand your story, what you do is you actually get people into self-actualization because you are empowering them. You are making their lives better, not by what you do, but what you provide on their behalf. You then get out of this commoditized view into specialty good or service. And what does it do when you look over the left? You can increase price, you get to increase margin, and believe it or not, you increase loyalty because you're there for your customers. And that's all they're looking for, man. They need help. They want to, of course, achieve epic growth, and you're the person to help do that. But you can't do it through the old commoditized thinking of features and benefits. It's not what you make, but it's what you make happen in their life. So what stories would you like your audiences to share about you and your brand? Why don't we jump right into this? When we do this process, there's really 4 primary story pillars that we are after. Your number 1 position in the marketplace, which we are going to take you through here in just a second. The emotional promise that you deliver. Again, it's not what you make, but it's what you make happen. Your personality. Do you have a really good sense of how you are communicating and sharing your personality with the world through your webinars, through your materials, through your website? What we find is most people, and I've had this experience too, is we kind of are like Sybil. We say one thing and look one way to some group, and we say something and look a completely different way to another group. And until you really understand and appreciate your personality, which you can do through brand archetyping, which we'll cover here in a minute too, then it helps inform all of your creative expression and how you communicate with the world. And then finally, your purpose. What is it that you do? Why do you exist beyond simply making money? I mean, so I know we're going to be covering a lot in this, and I just want to take a quick breath here. I'm going to put together another quick poll. I'm kind of curious. Let me see if I can make this happen. All right, we're going to hit the reset. This is wonderful. You just get to see, this webinar and all of its glory and gory in this case. So is the suspense killing you? What I'm typing here? Coming at you. Let's see. Starting poll. I can only assume you can see this now. Let us know. Have you really fine-tuned what your number one position is in the marketplace? No, yeah, now that should be no. Sorry about that. No, two. Okay, and that's I guess why you're here. But some of you I know that I've recognized on the chat here and the attendees. I know you've been through this and you've got a sense of what it is, and you're really close if you haven't already got it dialed in. We have some more in here. 9, then okay, 10. Yeah, 3. There's a few of you haven't. Well, that's great. And the reason why I want to do this is for you all to get a sense of who's in the room and what they're looking for. So why don't we jump back over to this and let's get in. I'm going to show you how a really simple way that I learned about 2 decades ago to do this, and it works beautifully. So. Chapter 1 of the story cycle process is simply knowing your backstory, understanding what your number one position is in the marketplace. And as I said before, this is the place where you declare your number one position in the market is your first step out of the primordial muck of commoditization. Now, by the way, this would be a great place to retweet that with the Own Your Story hashtag to win a free workbook, but I'm just saying. So let's jump into this because I learned this process and I have found it really, really works well. Now, I want you to think about this. I got these characters here on the side that are all squished for some reason now. And I want you to think through this process. It's called the and, but, and therefore. And it essentially is the beginning to every story. The and, but, and therefore is important because you, in 1 to 2 sentences, can create the absolute foundation for your story of setup, conflict, resolution. And here I want to take you through time and show you why this is the absolute DNA of every story. It's something you can use for everything you do. So in the top left-hand corner, you're seeing there is a caveman, right? So the caveman, if you're thinking about the caveman who's telling stories, you might have a grunt of, if he's telling a story, someone's reacting to this, that's the and. Then the saber-toothed tiger shows up. That's the conflict in the story. But he slays the tiger and he's back telling, sitting around this campfire, to live another day. And it's a learning experience for his audience. They go, So here is the most basic, primal form of story, if you think about it. Aristotle said, every story has a beginning, a setup, a middle, and an end. You think about Shakespeare. He was all about introduction, rising action, climax. The next one down who you might not be able to tell is Mozart. But did you know the sonata allegro form is totally a form based off of exposition, development, and resolution, the 3-act structure of the story. Hegel, the famous philosopher, in argument, in all scientific argument, there's thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So the thesis is the setup, antithesis is the conflict or the argument against that, and then they come through with the resolution or the synthesis. Finally, Spielberg, anything in Hollywood, setup, conflict, resolution. So this 3-act structure story has been around since literally the beginning of time, and it's so simple, Even a caveman can do it, as we've identified here. I want to show you one more example of it, the one that I think is the greatest, and that comes from Cartman. Do you realize that every episode from South Park, they do this thing called this rule of replacement? They take out the ands, because it means the story's going nowhere, and they replace it with buts and therefores. And, but, and therefore. And I learned all of this from Randy Olson, who I happened to be with last week in UCLA. He did a workshop that I got to attend all about this. Randy is a Harvard PhD oceanographer who gave up tenure, went to USC, I'm sorry, graduated from their film school, created 3 documentaries around global warming and climate change, and really his life now is dedicated to help scientists do a better job of communicating their discoveries. His discovery one day was watching the South Park video, 6 Days to Air, when he learned about the rule of replacement that Matt and Trey go through with every script, and founded this ABT, and now he uses it in all of his scientific work in teaching scientists how to work. Well, I use it in teaching at ASU, and I use it in brand development because it's the easiest way for you to get around the foundational structure of your story. Let me show you what I mean. Here's how I use the ABT in my story. And then after this, you can write this down, and I would love for you to use it in your story just to help set the big picture of what you're trying to accomplish. So let's start with my declarative statement. Okay, I've been in advertising for 30 years. That's true. Nobody can take that away from me. I've been around that long, 3 decades of this. And I've experienced the influence brands can have through mass media over that amount of time. So I'm raising the stakes. Not only have I been in it, but we've had a lot of success with it in your traditional modes of advertising. But as I talked about earlier, technology has leveled the playing field, and now the masses are the media, creating the attention economy. And why does that matter? Well, it's because we all become commodities in this abundance that is available to everyone. Not only the abundance of brand selection, but the abundance of communication that is really hard to cut through. So that is what has made the Business of Story platform unique, urgent, timely, and relevant in the lives of my customers. So therefore, I help enlighten brands rise above the noise, clarify their offering, and be heard through the power of story. That, in a nutshell, is the DNA for everything I do. And you're going to see how it leads to my #1 position statement. So what I want you to do after this program, and but and therefore, buy Randy's book, by the way. It's really a fascinating read that it really ingrains in you how you can use this and but and therefore in your life. But write your and but and therefore statement. And you know what? When you write it, if you want to share it with me, send it over to me. That's right. Send it over to me at park@businessofstory.com, and I'll be happy to critique your and, but, and therefore. Make it simple. Make it 2 sentences long at tops, and you'll see what it does for you. It's pretty dang cool. It's a really, really powerful way to go. So once you have that foundation, and in fact, for this program, you don't even need to have that foundation. I know you're already thinking about it. You're probably already scribbling it down. Here's what I want you to do to boil down to your #1 specialty. I want you in a piece of paper alongside you. If you've got the workbook, you can write right in your workbook. Industry. What industry do you work in? Very high level, we're talking 50,000 feet. Name the industry that you work in. In my case, my industry is communications. And I know it's very high level because a lot of people are in communications. AT&T's in communications. Other ad agencies, ad folks are in communications. TV stations are in communications. So, but all I want to do is find my place in the world. And I'll take you through an example of this in a second. And then within that industry, write down what category do you service? What category are you in and day out that you're servicing? So what we're trying to do is get you from 50,000 foot level down about 30,000. We're going to keep going because we want to get you down to the weeds of your #1 specialty, your position statement. In the next box, within that category, what's your specialty? Now here's the thing. Michael Gass, a good friend of mine, who is an advertising new biz consultant guy. He's been around forever. He was back in the old days of the madman days of selling. Well, maybe he wasn't quite that old. But the old way of doing it in inbound marketing now is what he's really owned in his industry. And he says, look, in this day and age of abundance, we can't be all things to all people. We have to focus. So this is where your focus comes in when you start saying, what do I truly specialize in? And you probably have that little voice in the back of your head that's saying, well, wait a minute, if I get too specialized, aren't I going to miss a lot of other business? The answer is no. You get that specialty, it creates its own momentum, its own force moving forward. And then like a boat across a clear lake, you create this wake that reaches out and it touches other people and they come into your slipstream, if you will. But it all is about getting really focused. So what industry, what category, what specialty in that category, and then as a specialist in that category, what do you do better than anybody else? What do you do better than anybody else? So the only way I can show you, I think the best way to show you this is how I go about it. Again, my industry is communications. And I've been doing it for 30 years. I've been in this industry, and some different factors: ad agency owner, teacher now. I mean, that's in academia, but communicating. And with the business of story, this is where I start really fine-tuning my message. So the category I'm in, well, I'm in advertising, marketing, and sales, because those are the people I primarily work with. I work with as a brand consultant, and I work with sales teams to help them really refine their story. Now, I'm also doing a lot of work in leadership these days, which I never intended to do, and nor am I trained leadership coach like my good friend Kevin, who's on this broadcast. But I help leaders do a better job of understanding the story, kind of what you and I are going through right now. So that's that wake, that slipstream effect as I get more focused. Now let's take it even deeper. So my specialty, I don't place ads anymore, really. I do a little media buying, but really I'm getting out of that. I don't produce websites anymore. I don't produce TV commercials like I used to, or radio spots. Mine is about strategic brand storytelling, teaching, consulting, workshops, coaching. That's what I do. And then when it gets down to the actual production of it, I'm there as a guide, as a mentor. So that leads me through my number one position, which I believe separates me from everybody else in the marketing consulting world and communications. The business of story is the number one resource for professional services firms to achieve epic growth for their enterprise and their people through the proven power of the story cycle process. This is what I'd like you to get at. I would like you to get to the point that you have got it so refined that you say, I am the number one resource for this. Now, I specify mine because I've got my story cycle. So my business of story platform from which I work from, which is uniquely my own, that already starts segregating me, differentiating me out of the overall marketing realm, is the number one resource for professional services firms. Now, it's just not for professional services firms, but that's where I've got my arrows pointed at this point. And yet I get this slipstream effect of a lot of other organizations, nonprofits, for-profits, the government, foundations that come into this because I figure, hey, if it's good for professional services firms, it's going to be good for me too. But it gives me a point of departure for all of my storytelling. For epic growth for their enterprise and their people. Now, it was first and foremost about growing the brand, but in doing so, I've learned that I also have this impact, or the process has the impact on the leadership and really having their organizations understand themselves internally first to get their employees on board with this new story so that they can live into a new prosperous future together. And then I use this through the proven power of the story cycle process. My proprietary process that, again, I didn't invent. It was inspired from by Joseph Campbell's to use in brand storytelling. So that's how I focus my number one position down, and that's how I get my story going. This is where I take that first step out of that primordial muck of commoditization. This is what I stand for, and this is what I do. And you know what? All of a sudden, my competition has become very narrow. And even within that competition, there are really great brand storytellers out there, but they do it in different ways. They do it in some cases kind of a surfacey level. Some focus on just innovation. Some focus on just technology. My focus is to dig deep, drill deep into what I know best through 30 years of doing this, and this is understanding a brand story. The soup to nuts, the bones, the sinew, everything about that brand story, taking it deep so that you can really own it and move forward and prosper from it. So speaking of moving forward, let's jump back over now to the next stage in all this. All right, so we've got a communications category, specialty. What is your number one specialty? Who's your hero? Chapter 2. Now, you are not the hero of this journey. I hate to tell you that. You are actually command a more important role as the mentor or guide, because your job is to help your clients and customers get what they want. And when you deliver on that by placing them at the center of your brand story, they will go out of their way to help you get what you want. Now, we won't spend a lot of time on this. If you've got the workbook is a great way to go, because I ask you in there to identify your top 3 audiences, and I ask you to prioritize their audiences and what they want. But for today's session and the simplicity of it, let's talk about who cares. Just identify your number one audience. Who is it that buys you the most? Are they in-house, out-of-house? Is it a client thing? Is it an individual? Is it an organization? And try to get as specific about them as you possibly can. In the workbook, you'll fill this out from audience 1, audience 2, audience 3. I'll take you very quickly through mine, but for today's session, just think of your very top audience, because I want to keep it simple. But what I do, so my audience is number 1 is typically a CEO, founder, or a partner in an organization, often a professional services firm, but not always, that is typically a mid-market company that has proven their business model over the course of a few years or several years, and now they are exploding, but their brand story hasn't stayed up with them. So I come in and I help them. They've gotten to this part by just simply working their butts off, being there 24/7. But now they've got to get more sophisticated in how they share their story, because they're experiencing national growth, sometimes international growth, or competition is starting to show up because the competition is seeing how much success they're having, and they're realizing that they haven't brought a lot of meaning to their product yet or their brand story. So this is what they want. They want to overcome the frustration and operational underperformance of not having a defined brand story that everyone can live into and prosper from for measurable results. So that's my number 1 audience. Now, audiences 2, chief marketing officers, they want something very similar, but they're not looking quite so much on the operational side as they are as their sales and their outbound and inbound marketing. So they want a brand story that they can overcome, again, the frustration, the emotional frustration of not having it pulled together, of lackluster advertising and marketing communications, and rise above the noise of the attention economy with a quantifiable ROI. How do we prove that this works? So you use story and you demonstrate through their analytics and through their sales the power this has over the old way of having a very scattered shot, undefined story. Number 3 are directors of sales. I get these guys all the time, and what they constantly say is, I got 5 guys in the field and none of them are telling the same story. So you can see where this all starts at the top. You got to know what your story is before everybody else can live into it and prosper from it. Again, theirs is a frustration around this, and just to help them pull together a sales team using disparate and watered down product service stories and use a more reliable story system to achieve epic sales growth. Now, most of you on today's call are actually not any of these folks, because it's not geared for them. It's not targeted at them. One of the things in doing this work for these brands, both small, medium, and large brands, is I've had so many people just like you reach out to me and say, how can you help me with my consultancy, with my solopreneurship? And that's why we knew that it was so important to get this program out here, because I want to show you that you can use this not only for yourself to identify your brand, who you really stand for, what you really stand for, and grow your influence, but you can then use it for your clients moving forward. So that was just a quick overview of who my primary audiences are, and yet, not to bring you down, but you also kind of fall in that 4th level there. But you have come in because I've been so focused on other things, on other clients, to get you here to show you that this can be equally, if not more powerful for you than for them. All right, so let's continue on. So we've had you think through what your number one position is in the marketplace and really identify that, own that. So you can say, I own this position. Who cares? You talked and thought a little bit about your audience. Right now, I want you to just think about your number one audience. And then what's at stake? You know, what's totally at stake for them? What do they stand to gain by working with you? And what do they stand to lose by staying in status quo and not do anything about that? So that's something to consider, because that starts backing up how you arrived at what your number one position is in the marketplace. So what do they stand to gain or lose? Now just make a sheet down, a piece of paper, write out what your offering is, your number one position, write your audience, your top number, your audience, and then be real clear with this. Do a self-assessment. On the left-hand side, what do they stand to gain by getting involved with you? What do they stand to lose by not participating in what you have to offer? Okay, we're moving in, and by the way, again, the workbook, it goes into greater detail in that area. We're moving through some of the high levels because, again, I promised you that we would get to your number one position, promise, personality, and purpose in today's show. So when you're thinking about your position, you got to get to the point now as you're leveling up through the story cycle process to create that unique value proposition. You need to articulate it in an emotional story that people will connect with. This is all in response to disruption in the marketplace, or what I call the call to adventure. Again, you can't sell in the status quo unless you're the low price leader, and who wants to be that, because there's no margin in it. So how are you helping clients respond to disruption in the marketplace, or how are you creating that disruption in the marketplace? This goes back to all those things about we talked about of who do you service, at what level do you service them, and how are you the go-to resource to do that? So you start assembling the different elements of this, and I'll keep this up for a minute. My audiences, my stakes, I use my number one position to talk about the mentor, how I do that. I position it against the competitors of like this is really how I've separated myself from them, and this is what the ultimate offering is. This is this process that I also got out of the same book I read 20 years ago that I cannot for the life of me remember what the name of the book was, but I've used this process over and over again for not only identifying my number one position in the marketplace, but then translating that into a unique value proposition that I can really live into and prosper from. So I've identified my audiences. What's at stake for them who want to experience substantial, measurable growth for their enterprise and their people. Again, I used to only be focused on their enterprise, and then I realized how powerful this is in a leadership realm of actually connecting with their people and getting to live into them. So I changed that into their enterprise and their people. The mentor to the business of story, taken from my number one position, is the number one resource to create and activate a proven brand communications platform through the story cycle system. I revised that a little bit because you can see now my story is morphing into bringing a little bit more emotion into it. Now, I got to juxtapose that against something. My competitors, unlike boutique and full-service agencies who attempt to use storytelling on your behalf as a vendor, counting on their innate abilities with little intent, form, or substance. Now, look, I'm not trying to throw them under the bus. What I'm saying here is agencies, good agencies, are innate storytellers, and they just come at it naturally. But it doesn't mean it's always work. And I know that we've had that same experience too, that sometimes you have spectacular successes, sometimes you have these mediocre missteps, and I'll even pop in for this one. And occasionally you have that spectacular failure. We've had that too. What I found with this process is when you're intentional about it, and as you are being intentional about it today for your brand story, that it makes everything else easier, and you can count more on success because it's simply the way our minds are wired to take in story, to take in content and create meaning around it. So we are juxtaposing all this. Let me go back in here to what the competition is doing, that they do it more by gut versus using the gut and having this intentional approach. So the overall offering comes down to the business of story embeds the 10-step story cycle process, our priority process, structure within your organization to reignite in your people the one true superpower we all possess, storytelling, to achieve epic growth. And I'm doing all this, of course, because I want to keep leveling myself up out of that primordial muck of commoditization to a unique value proposition. This is a little bit longer than most, but I like it because I think it really explains what I do to people. The business of story helps you achieve epic growth for your enterprise and your people by reigniting within you the one true superpower we all possess, storytelling. And I got a typo in there, darn me. That's what it's all about. That's what I do. So you can see now I am continuing to level up out of this commoditized viewing. I've gotten through my position. I pulled together a unique value proposition of what it is I do through the platform. We move now into chapter 5, the villains, fog, and crevasses. In every story, we have people out to thwart our progress. So villains is the competition. So who is out there that I need to position against and outperform, which helps me focus my vision. And also, what are those inner voices, those inner villains that are telling me I'm not good enough, I'm not fast enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not handsome enough? How do you overcome those? This is just a point in this process of contemplation. If you have the workbook, there's a whole worksheet in there that you work out to really identify the obstacles and antagonists that are not only in your way to grow your brand, but are in the way of your customers to buy into your brand. Fog or the blind spots. What is it your customers don't know about you that you need to inform them on to clear up the fog on that? So that they go, oh, to clarify your story and say, oh, I get it. You know, I think I could use your service. And then the crevasses. What are the gaps? What are the gaps in your story and your performance? We all have them. We say one thing, we do another. It's really important to clarify what those are so that you can bring them together. Again, not so important right now in today's session, but something for you to really consider, because if you're going to own that #1 position in the marketplace and have a value proposition that you can live into, you have to get real with the obstacles and antagonists in your way and how you can overcome them, how you can help your audiences overcome them. All right. We've really worked through the position of all of this stuff, and this is setting the context for your story. Let's now jump into the mentor. This is the promise and personality that I talked about earlier. So the mentor is kind of cool. This is where it's all about humanizing the brand, and humanizing is really important to do so. Let me tell you a quick little story. When I was going to school, I worked as a laborer, as a carpenter's assistant for my father's heavy construction company. Constructors PAMCO out of Seattle, Washington. They built dams and bridges and tunnels. And the last project I was on was in a beautiful lake up in the Cascade Mountains, the foothills out of Seattle. And we were literally raising a dam. It's called Spada Lake. It was really kind of a phenomenal place to work. It's an enormous watershed that fed the northern part of Seattle area. Well, one summer I spent down there building forms down in this holding area down below the mountain. Helicopters would come in, they would hook up to the forms, they would take them up to the dam, drop them in place. And I was working with this old-timer carpenter, which I learned so much from. And one day we were, hammering away, and dang it, if I didn't take that hammer and smash my thumb. I mean, it killed me. And the other thing was, at the time as I was going to school, I was a music major. I studied music composition and theory, and I needed my fingers to play the piano. And so I was running around, I was jumping up and down. You know how you put your finger underneath there when it's hurting and it's throbbing? And this guy just starts laughing at me. Dave was his name. He just starts laughing. And I look around, I almost have tears coming out of my eyes. And then I grab my hammer and I throw that thing across the lumber yard there. And he looked at me and he just shook his head, as the old timers do. And he says, "Park, park, park." And I'm jumping around saying, what? He says, "Park, never let an inanimate object get the best of you." And essentially, that inanimate hammer got the best of me because it just plowed my finger and that hurt. Why does that matter about your brand story? Well, I hate to tell you, but all of our brands are inanimate. They're just this thing out there that don't have a tremendous amount of meaning with people until we animate them, until we humanize them. And that's what this step of the story cycle process does, the enter the mentor. The most important person, individual in this story is actually you, to help your audiences who are at the center of the story get what they want. but you can only do that if you truly humanize your offering, especially in the professional services world, where stats, facts, banal content is what they all live on. But that's what we do. We got to humanize it. So let's jump over and let's talk about how we do that. We get into the Enter the Mentor, and this is what I want you to think about. What is the promise, the emotional promise people get from working with you? So you got to really get out of your left brain and jump into your right brain. I call this the squint test. When I'm writing something and I'm thinking about, is this any good? I literally squint, I lay back in my chair, and I ask myself, what does this feel like? What I just said, what I just wrote, what I just created, what does this feel like? I want you to do that about your brand. What does it feel like to work with you, and when people come in connection with your brand and they have success with you? What does that feel like? Again, we're not selling what you make. You're selling what you make happen in people's lives. Now, I arrived at this word, this promise for the business of story, the story cycle process, as enchantment, because I have had so many people, surprisingly, actually, to me, come up to me and say, this process is so enchanting. And I use that, and I realize that when they apply it to their worlds and they see how successful they can be at creating epic growth, that it's just really, truly enchanting to them. I heard it again yesterday from 2 or 3 of the folks that they didn't know this word, but they came up to me and they said, I'm enchanted by this. And I think the reason why people are enchanted by it is it's something that is baked into our psyche. It's the way our brains are hardwired to go through life and make meaning. And when we can connect with people on that level, we literally enchant them. So what do you do? What is that descriptor that communicates an emotional promise that you deliver, not only through your stories, but how you deliver in your final delivery for them? The next thing then I want you to think about is the gift. Again, it's not what you make, it's what you make happen. So people get enchanted through this process, so they tell me, because what I really truly believe I do is create this storytelling superpower. I reignite this innate superpower inside of them. If you've been at some of my other workshops, you'll know I say this all the time. When I asked you at the top of the show, how many of you are good storytellers? We actually have a lot of good storytellers that you're confident in your storytelling. But I tell everybody, I really honestly believe we were at the tops of our storytelling games in kindergarten, and our educational systems, our corporate cultures, societal constructs, political correctness have all conspired to silence that inner innate storyteller within us. What I have found, unintentionally, because I only really started from the brand strategy standpoint, but what this process does is reignites within everyone that does this, or most everyone that does this, that innate superpower of storytelling. And I call it a superpower because your words, your communications can enact change, can move people to action, move people emotionally, and get them to do something. And we're talking about complete strangers. We're talking about people halfway around the world, don't even speak your language. But when you use the right story and share it with them, you connect, you enchant them, you bewitch them in some respects, and you move them to action. And if that's not a superpower, I don't know what is. So basically, you're looking into, I guess, my little Bible or superpowers. I don't know what you would call this, but this is how the sorcerers bring it together. Another one of my favorite lines, I suppose, is if content is king, story is the kingdom's sorcerer, because it is truly that bewitching. So that is what my gift is. It's not this workbook. It's not this system. It's what this does for you. It reignites this superpower and gives you an intentional way to go with it, an intentional way to make it happen. Now, finally, in this realm, and this is a deep dive that we don't have time for today, I want you to think about what your personality is, what your brand personality is. And there's 12 of them. These are based off this famous Swiss psychologist, Carl Jung. He talked about the 12 primary character archetypes that we all use to make meaning out of the world around us, to identify who people are, what they're about. There's probably a bit of stereotyping that goes in with this, but why do we do this? Because our brain has to create meaning for survival. So we use these basic archetypes. And I don't know about you, but having done this business for a long time, we used to do things when we're trying to figure out brand archetypes like, If you were a dog, what kind of dog would you be? If you were a drink, what kind of drink you would be? If you were a magazine, what kind of magazine you would be? And that's how I was taught to do it. And I never, ever, ever could figure out how that actually worked. I read a book 5 or 6 years ago called Heroes and Outlaws. And it's about using brand archetyping for the branding world. Fabulous book. In fact, I had the writers on the Business of Story podcast about a month and a half ago. Listen into it, and it is a really fascinating look on how you can use these archetypes to create, start animating that inanimate object that truly is your brand. And so let's take a quick look at this, and I'll give you a link too that you might want to write down where I can take you deeper into this on SlideShare. So for the Business of Story, my number one brand archetype to me is the creator. It's just where I grew up. I grew up playing the piano. I grew up writing songs as a little kid, studying music composition and theory, knowing I was never going to make any money at it. I also studied communications, thank God, but I apply the two worlds to this day. I had mentioned Tom McDermott earlier in this program. He helped me through his Ignite program. I think it was back in 2009, 2000, maybe 2008. Identify that, man, I am really fascinated. My curiosity is about how does creativity work and how can we use it in our lives to make things better. So my natural inclination of understanding how music composition theory worked played over to story composition theory when our middle son went to film school, and I learned what they taught him in Hollywood about creating stories, but that's a whole nother story. Anyways, this is my primary archetype. It's who I am. It's what I pursue professionally or personally, my personal passions, and it's also what I've done for the past 30 years. Now, I've got two supporting archetypes that go along with this. The sage, and I only can say the sage because, well, I've done this for 3 decades. I've seen what works, what doesn't work, and how things have so dramatically changed with the advent of technology. The masses are now the media, and how we have to connect using the ancient but proven power of storytelling. So I've really, really studied this, and I bring in sage in this because I find myself in this area, especially in teaching in academia, at ASU and so forth. And finally, the other one is the magician, not only because I love what Steve Jobs did, but I do believe, going back to that idea of enchantment around the brand, that there is something extraordinarily magical about when you can see how powerful story is in your life and when you can use it yourself to literally nudge the world in any direction you choose. It is enchanted. It is magical. So those are the 3 pillars of my archetype, my personal brand archetype. And they also play out in this. This goes into more depth on SlideShare, and there's the SlideShare link. Just look this up, 12 primary personality archetypes every brand is built upon. Go to bit.ly/parkarcs, and it'll take you through each of the 12. That'll give you a chance to kind of look, and I dare you to arrive at one. First, arrive at the one that you feel really represents you and represents your brand, and then find 1 or 2 that you believe support that. And again, if you like, send me what you've arrived at and why. It always helps to write this stuff down and send it along. So, okay. So we've been doing a lot here, taking a break. We're coming towards the top of the hour. This session goes till 11:30. We definitely want to have time for you to have some Q&As. But let's go through the last couple things in this story cycle process. We identified what your number 1 position is in the marketplace to help rise you out of that primordial muck of commoditization. How you communicate that through an empowering and emotional, unique value proposition that really demonstrates how you are either responding to change in the marketplace or you are the disruptive force in the marketplace, and how that makes you the most timely, relevant, and urgent offering for your customers. We've jumped into how do you humanize your brand through your promise, your emotional promise. What is the gift that you supply them? It's not what you make, but what you make happen. And then finally, how do you communicate that to the world? And how consistent are you in that personality that you created? What is your brand archetype? So let's go into a couple more pieces here as we arrive at what your brand purpose is, and again, these are the 4 primary pillars of what this whole process is all about. Now, in the workbook, we take you through the road of trials, and we're not going to do that here other than answering this question. Now that you set this all up for your audiences, what will you do for them? What will you do for or with them? In the workbook, it takes you through a very simple customer journey map of only 3 primary mile markers: brand awareness, brand adoption, brand appreciation, and it gets you to start thinking about, where is my audience on their story, on their journey relative to my brand offering? Do they know about me or not? So they're in the awareness stage. Have they already bought in and I want to keep them around? So they're in the adoption phase, but still kind of dating. They're not totally in. And how do you move them into the brand appreciation phase? You need to understand the story journey they're on with your brand at each one of these levels, and which stories you tell on your behalf to your customer, to your audience, so that they can make your story their story. It's about just simply transporting your story into their world so that they can own it. See where this is going? It all comes down to, no one will buy into your story until you absolutely own it first, and that's through these 4 pillars. Victory is at hand. We do the same thing after looking through your story journey with your customers. Now, how do you celebrate success at each one of these mile markers with them? What does that look like? In this case, in the simplified version, simply ask yourself, what does success look like? Now, some of you might be saying, does it to me? I mean, what does my success look like? I said, no, it's not about you. What does success look like for your audiences? And you can even think about it each one of these journeys, but all I want to know at this point is, what does success look like? Because then that leads us into the next one, the moral of your story. And this is simply asking the question, what does success feel like to them? Hugely important, because in everything we do, in all of our communications, really the first question you should be asking yourself is, what do I want my audiences to think, feel, and do? You've got to connect with them on that emotional level. So what does success feel like? And this is really important, because at this level, at the moral of the story, every story has a moral to it, whether you realize it or not. They can be implicit, they can be explicit. Every joke has some sort of moral or meaning to it. So every time you are communicating, your audiences are processing this through the reptilian brain and their subconscious. They may even be leveling it up to their rational mind, and they're trying to figure out, what is your point? What am I supposed to take away from this? And what we ultimately want them to do is, we want to connect our values with their values. We have these shared values with our audiences, and we want to make sure that we connect with them on a very visceral level through the emotion of what they receive by being a part of our brand world. So what is the moral of the story? What values are you demonstrating that your brand holds dear, that you can connect with your audiences, so that you can demonstrate that you understand and know them, and you can help them get what they want? And again, once you do that, they will go out of their way to help you get what you want. So be really specific on this point. What do you want them to feel? What does success feel like? I know we're getting all touchy and feely here, but we're getting to the end, the moral of the story. Let's move right into chapter 10. Actually, no, I'm getting ahead of myself. Going back to this moral of the story, this is the purpose point. What is the purpose? Why do you exist going beyond just making money? This is the purpose of Business of Story, exists to help people live into their most powerful stories. Again, I started this out as just being a brand strategy guide, but it has moved so much deeper, because people get a lot out of this personally, they get a lot out of it leadership-wise, and they find ways that they can connect with their audiences, be they internal employees, external audiences, shareholders, stakeholders, NGOs, you name it. But when they use story and use it to truly understand their audiences, and then create a story that all can live into and prosper from, this is what drives me day in and day out. The Business of Story exists to help people live into their most powerful stories. So ask yourself, put your name in there instead of Business of Story, or your brand name in story, and answer that question. Why do you exist? To help people do what? It's not about making money at this point. It's about what is it you help them do. And then that leads us to chapter 10, to be continual, or rituals, brand rituals. We want to keep them coming back for more. Well, brand rituals attach emotional meaning to mundane behavior to create genuine and lasting brand loyalty. That's what it's all about. How do we keep them coming back for more? And you'll think about this through your workbook, both physically, what do you provide that they can keep going to and nibbling on to help them grow their business? And then emotionally, how do they know that you're always there waiting for them so that they make you a very active, important part of their life and continue this brand revolution? And by the way, this starts then the next revolution, the virtuous cycle of the story cycle. How do you keep them coming back for more? Once you do, then you go through this whole thought process again. They're back for more. What's at stake? What do they want? What disruption is continuing to go on in the marketplace that you're therefore helping them get it? What are they up against using it? How do you back up the emotional promises that you've made through your personality, and how do you communicate to that at a very consistent level? Now that they're in the adoption phase and the road of trials, what stories are you telling them to level them up to have success in that area? And what does success look as we move into chapter 8? Chapter 9, then, everything you're doing continues to underscore the beliefs and the values that you share with your customers through the moral of the story and how they feel by interacting with you, and that promise that you deliver day in and day out. And that then leads to the next brand ritual, chapter 10, and the cycle starts all over again with brand appreciation until you eventually move them into brand activism or evangelism, where now you have completely transported your story into their world and they are freely sharing it with their world. So you can see how this all comes together. We've touched on just some of the high points, but what I want to do is it comes into this hierarchy of story structure and take you through this. At the very basal, rising out of the commodity, what is your number one position in the marketplace? What do you do better than anyone else? Who cares? Who are your audiences? What do they want? What's at stake for them? What is your unique value proposition? That all melds up then into you humanizing your brand and owning that story. What is up by the gift that you're going to supply them? And the personality. How do you talk to them and deal with them through all of this? All leading up to that North Star, that grand brand purpose. Why do you exist to help people accomplish and do what? I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but this is where the whole story cycle process comes together. When you do the workbook, when you sit down and do just a basic 10-step worksheet that I can send you after this program, take you through the most basic elements of answering the questions of this, it'll really help you start a very active, important part of their life and continue this brand revolution. And by the way, this starts then the next revolution, the virtuous cycle of the story cycle. How do you keep them coming back for more? Once you do, then you go through this whole thought process again. They're back for more. What's at stake? What do they want? What disruption is continuing to go on in the marketplace that you're therefore helping them get it? What are they up against using it? How do you back up the emotional promises that you've made through your personality, and how do you communicate to that at a very consistent level? Now that they're in the adoption phase and the road of trials, what stories are you telling them to level them up to have success in that area? And what does success look as we move into chapter 8? Chapter 9, then, everything you're doing continues to underscore the beliefs and the values that you share with your customers through the moral of the story and how they feel by interacting with you, and that promise that you deliver day in and day out. And that then leads to the next brand ritual, chapter 10, and the cycle starts all over again with brand appreciation until you eventually move them into brand activism or evangelism, where now you have completely transported your story into their world and they are freely sharing it with their world. So you can see how this all comes together. We've touched on just some of the high points, but what I want to do is it comes into this hierarchy of story structure and take you through this. At the very basal, rising out of the commodity, what is your number one position in the marketplace? What do you do better than anyone else? Who cares? Who are your audiences? What do they want? What's at stake for them? What is your unique value proposition? That all melds up then into you humanizing your brand and owning that story. What is the emotional promise backed up by the gift that you're going to supply them? And the personality. How do you talk to them and deal with them through all of this? All leading up to that North Star, that grand brand purpose. Why do you exist to help people accomplish and do what? I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but this is where the whole story cycle process comes together. When you do the workbook, when you sit down and do just a basic 10-step worksheet that I can send you after this program, take you through the most basic elements of answering the questions of this, it'll really help you start pulling together your brand story. This ultimately leads to a brand statement, kind of a run-on statement, if you will, but this is where I try to capture it all and embed it in one cornerstone statement that I use for everything. So see how I've taken all of this content and tried to create and bring emotion into it. By flexing the one true superpower we all possess, storytelling, we lead professional service firms to epic growth through our proven story cycle process that defines your brand, creates a narrative your people can live into and prosper from, enchants your audiences, and connects your shared values with your customers so you can nudge the world in any direction you choose. So we try to have some fun with that. We try to make it very humanize it as best we can. We don't actually come out and say enchanted in it, but we kind of want that to come through as we're talking through it. And it's what leads us to everything that is the story cycle process. So I know we have covered a ton of stuff here. And let me just wrap up on this one, then we'll open it up for questions. Oop, did that wrong. I figured in this amount of time I would eventually do that one wrong. The process. We animate it, we bring it so that it animates your life. And as I mentioned earlier, we have got this workbook that is available to you. You can download it. It'll be on Amazon in about a month or so, but right now you can download it from Business of Story. If you go here, and again, if you've been using the Own Your Story hashtag, we'll be giving one of these away. What this is, and I know some of you on the program here have already worked through it, this has now grown to a 61-page workbook. And don't let that detour you. It's just extraordinarily deep and really makes you think and sort through what your brand story is. On the left-hand side, I share how we use it for the Business of Story, so you have an active example of how this works. On the right-hand side, then, you can fill in your story. And because it's an interactive PDF ebook, you can fill it in right there. You could do a save as, and you could, by the way, use this for your brand story, for your customer's brand story. You can use it time and time again. You can also use it for creating communications. You're thinking about blog posts, videos, or whatever. You can actually use this exact same workbook for that. It's that's the beauty of the story cycle process, or the universal structure story, is a fractal. You can use it throughout everything. It's also designed to have you capture your thoughts, and then it takes you through a funnel to fine-tune those thoughts down, bringing emotion at every step of the journey so that you can arrive at your core position, promise, personality, and purpose, and capture all of that in a brand statement that you can then use, to help really own your story in the market. I've got a video that goes along with each one of the chapters that you can click through and pop up on YouTube, and it just reminds you what you're looking to do and try to make happen within each one of those chapters. I'm there for you. And it's there. It's waiting for you right now. So head on over to bit.ly.ownyourstoryworkbook. You can download that. Or again, one of you lucky folks out there will be a recipient of the brand. So as I'm closing out this section of it, I just want to ask you, when it's all said and done in your life, what will be your story? What will you be known for? It is about making money and being prosperous in our pursuits, because if we don't make money, we can't do what we ultimately want to do, and that's to help people. And I came across Mel Blanc's tombstone here, one of my favorite guys, the voices, 1,000 voices. That dude owned that story through all the cartoons that he did, Bugs Bunny, Roadrunner Hour, some of my favorites that I grew up on. But that's all, folks. That sums it up. Man, that dude owned his story. So that's it for today's session. Now I would love to open it up at the chat session or the Q&A, either one here. and answer any questions that you have. Let me get out of this. Okay, so if you've got a question, go ahead and shoot it through the Q&A, and I'm here to answer anything you've got. Bear with me as I keep sliding through. Man, oh, we got really a lot of great attendance through all of this. This is awesome. Janet, glad to have you here. Sean Wright, great to have you here. Grega, awesome to have you back. Joanna, you said you were going to be here. Glad you made it. I know I went through a lot of stuff. If you've got a question for me, throw it in the Q&A or shoot me one here in the chat. I've been going so fast here that I haven't even been following the chat. I hope I didn't miss anything in the process. Rick, great to have you. By the way, Rick is doing some really amazing things in Alaska. He's got, what is your radio station? Is it Clef? Anyways, he's got a classic radio station up there. Rick joined us for our American Marketing Association workshop we did in Chicago in April. It's a 2-day brand story workshop. And you know what? He had so much fun with it. He's coming back. We're doing the same workshop in 2 weeks, although now I got to switch it up a little bit because I got a warm audience in there and I don't want to bore Rick. A 2-day brand story strategy workshop, again, sponsored, produced by the American Marketing Association, this time in Washington, D.C. I think you can find more at the ama.com/brand story or something like that, or I can put a link on it. So, Rick, great to have you here. Rick, do you recommend or did recommend that a marketer develop their own personal brand as opposed to their company? You know, here's the answer to that. I think both. I think in this day and age, when the masses are the media, and I'm reading this really great new book about it that's looking at pop culture and how everything is getting so fragmented, that I think it really behooves a leader to understand what their brand story is first and foremost, and then to make sure that they are using that brand story and living into, helping to inform and live into their corporate or business brand story. I don't think they can be separate. I don't think this man or woman over here, the leader, can stand for one kind of brand and be one thing and then not have that reflected in their brand over here. In the old days, I think you could get away with that. I don't think that works anymore. I think it ruins the authentic step. I just think they got to be connected. So I really encourage, and I've seen this through our program at ASU, that when these executives get really clear on who they are, what they're about, and as Simon Sinek says, why they do what they do, which translates to me as own their story, then and only then will they ever realize their full potential as a leader to drive that brand forward, to help their employees get what they want out of this interaction with the brand, and ultimately all of them coming together to help their audiences and their customers get what they want. So I do think it starts at the top. Something I came across just by doing this overall brand strategy, when I found the impact it had on the leaders in the room, I realized, and Kevin helped me too through our ASU program, realize that, no, man, you got to know your story first. You have to own it before the rest of it's really going to work as optimally as you would like. Thanks, Rick. It's Clef, K-L-E-F, Classical 980, Anchorage, Alaska. Pam, who is the author of Heroes and Outlaws? I knew you were going to ask me that. Marx and, gosh, two ladies wrote it. And I just cannot recall the second lady's name right now. But Heroes and Outlaws, search it. It's the first book that pops up on this, and it's a fabulous book on brand archetypes. And like I said, they wrote this book back in 2001. So they are kind of ahead of the curve in all this brand storytelling thing, and had them on Business of Story. You can hear their show, their episode. It was on about 4 to 5 weeks ago. You'll find it in the archive at businessofstory.com. Plus, that slide share that I shared earlier, Parks Arts, bit.ly/Parks Arts, has that book plus another book by Margaret Hartwell at the end of it. So it's got the names of the authors right there. And Rick's bringing his wife, trying to get her story pulled together. Good luck with that. I don't know if I dare try that with my wife. She's pretty good at that herself. Thanks, Lisa, for sharing that. Let's see. Let me scroll up. Are there other questions up here? Margaret Mark Carol Pearson, thank you very much. Hey, Park. Paul Walker. Hey, Paul, how's it going? Sitting with Miss Sneed. Hello, Elizabeth. By the way, full disclosure, Paul and I worked together. He was at a client, Global Water, many years ago, and we had a blast working together, pulling together one of the fastest growing private water utilities in the country right here in Arizona. And why, Paul? Because we took you through, you were one of the first to go through the story cycle process when we started truly applying it to brand strategy. So with that, let me go back to, I lost you here. Same with, how vital is it to connect with the audience via, this thing keeps popping down on me, via shared symbols? Super question. Let me direct you to another podcast we did with Nancy Duarte. Duarte is the queen, for lack of a better term, of presentation and story and the use of story in presentation techniques. They came out with a book, and I've got it around you somewhere, just recently about the power of symbols. Symbols are enormously powerful, Paul, in this day and age, especially as we're getting inundated with all kinds of written narrative, that our brains are immediately going to process imagery and symbols faster than anything. So we have to be very, very careful in the kinds of symbols we use to make sure that they are communicating on this subconscious level the kind of story that we want to tell. Now, we can also use symbology very powerfully in our written content through the use of metaphor, anecdotes, those sorts of things. But symbology is hugely important and something that you got to pay very close attention to. And it's hard to get right unless, of course, you truly own your story. So I think it might be coming even stronger as we get inundated in the attention economy with the pure cacophony of communication that we all take in. I think our brains are looking for the simplicity of symbology to help us connect some of our stories. So it's important stuff. Hey, Derek, great to have you here, man. Good, you shared that link too. Michael, good to have you here too. I'm glad that you overcame our timing. The thing about Arizona not being on daylight savings time, it is a bane. We deal with that for 6 months around here. All right, Michael, when considering the 4 brand pillars, do you look at it as a collective company or do you look at it at each target market? No, it has to be a collective company. It is, these pillars have to work literally across the board. Number one, they have to resonate with you internally. They have to be true to who you are. I mean, they literally are pillars that hold up your brand cathedral. So you've got to find that thread, that continuity. You can't be one thing to one group and something completely different to another group. Doesn't mean your story and the genre of your story can't change, but it has to be authentic and true to those pillars. Because they ultimately come down to, I talked about the ABT of being the DNA of story. Well, these pillars are truly the DNA of your entire brand story. They are that critical. So you need to find the pillars that truly work for you and hold up and support your brand and what your brand truly stands for, not only philosophically, but physically, and then how you use those to color and inform the types of stories that you share with your audiences. So now they've got to be the same pillars across the board. All right. Let me go down here. Anybody else in here?